Hello and welcome to today's impactful conversation with me, Nejmi Alexander, and my wonderful co-host, Dr. Glenn Wallis. Glenn, how are you doing?
You're really good, thank you. Yeah, very good indeed. So far, so good in terms of the year and the things that we've managed to sort of attack, if you like. There's a whole coaching conversation around why have you picked that word.
You.
Yeah, couldn't help myself. But no, thank you. Yeah, all really good.
Good stuff. In the spirit of thinking about the year and the year to come, at the recent podcasts, we talked a little bit about the leadership operating system, and that's sort of the theme that's going to underpin many of our podcasts over this year to come. And today we're going to start to explore one of the functionalities, one of the behaviors or the capabilities, whatever language we want to put around it, that forms an important part of leadership in a modern context. And it's this idea of stepping in and stepping out in leadership. Being able to navigate the tensions maybe around where making the right call on that in given the context, and unpacking what that really means, and the impact of judging that well or not, or judging it not so well. So how does that sound for today's conversation, Glenn?
Yeah, I think it's a really important topic to have relatively early on in our broader discussion of leadership, because a lot of it will be tied to work on identity and how leaders see themselves in that role as leader, or indeed not, and some of the challenges that will have, and also even to some extent what your version of leadership, what that framework looks like in your own head when you think about being a leader. And, is that serving you? I think just come back to why this might be important, or why we think it is important for leaders. And I think it's that you've got an ever-changing, rapidly evolving workspace, the advent of AI, skills being at the center of work, and developing skills, new skills quite quickly, and agility and those sorts of things. This is going to put a lot of challenges in the way of leaders, especially those who are stuck in a rather industrial model, if you like, of leadership. So I'm hoping what we can offer the audience and as we go forward is just some advice and tips on how to up their game as leaders. And I think what's really important for today particularly is that's less about leading with the title, with a title that suggests you're a leader. It's actually as an individual, as a human being, even maybe outside of your organizational life, are you able to lead yourself and others effectively? So yeah, really important. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah. I mean, we've started on, you've just illustrated there, Glenn, a few of the maybe contextual drivers around why this conversation is important, right? There's, it won't be a surprise to talk about, the ever-changing tech landscape, a world of AI, and the impact on future of work and what that means from a leadership perspective. There's change; it's accelerating, and so previous models of what leadership included might need to shift and adapt alongside that. Not only that, you've got multiple generations in the workforce, all with their different hopes and dreams, motives, ideas around work and career and what's motivating for them. They need a little bit of personalization, a bit of adaptation around how one leads those individuals really effectively, and a whole bunch of different sort of factors that are fundamentally shifting what great leadership includes, and what great leaders need to exemplify in order to have impact in this sort of changing landscape. And so one of those sort of factors, one of the things to consider then is this idea of, I put it down to like adaptability, or a flexing to the situation, with regards to this idea of, again, stepping in or stepping out. What does leadership include in those moments, and what's the right call? What, in fact, when is it right to step in and lead, and when is it right to step out, and how do we judge what the best way is to do that when it comes down to identity? Often it can come down to identity. We have a fairly fixed view often of what great leadership is, what it looks like, what it includes, and also what our own style is, when it comes to leadership too. Whereas being able to sort of flex in those moments in order to sort of assess and judge it right might mean shifting some of those ideas.
Yeah, I think that idea of agility gives you as much protection as you're going to get in what looks like the future of work. And what I mean by that is this, that if you have a fixed model in your head of what leadership is, I was going to say in a couple of years' time, I'm probably thinking more like in 6 weeks' time, that will be out, that would be outmoded because of the rate of change. And so I think what we're keen to help leaders, whether you've got the title or not, again, this is really, really important. It's not just for those people that would consider themselves leaders. This is for everyone. But if you've got a fixed model of how you arrive at situations and how you respond to situations, and it's too fixed, then you will be redundant in both senses of the word pretty quickly. I think the more agile you can be, the more flexible that you are, the greater range of approaches that you can adopt, the more you will be relevant. You will stay relevant for longer because you're able to flex to what you're seeing. And I think this is a bit of future proofing, if nothing else. I think you mentioned identity, and I've mentioned a couple of times this idea of whether you've got the title leader or not. Should we just explore that for a minute or two, just to give people an idea of whether you keep saying that, I don't know what you mean. Because I think both of us come from a sort of human-centered or human-centric idea of leadership. But it doesn't matter whether you've got the title or not. Let's explore that a little bit. What's your take on the message we're trying to get across to the audience in that respect?
Yeah. So when it comes to leadership, our identity in leadership, often that comes down to some simple questions, right? Am I the leader in this situation or not? Do I identify as being the person in lead or not? And if I am the leader, what does that entail? What does that mean that my role is in this situation? Am I assertive? Do I dominate the situation? I need to, set the vision or set the way forward. I need to set the parameters around the conversation or the outcome. I need to lead. What does that even mean to me? Being able to assign and understand your position, what you identify with in that moment, I think is really critical as a starting point. But also recognizing and acknowledging that identity might need to, again, flex or adjust given the situation. Even whether you feel that you're a leader or not, there is always an opportunity to lead or to demonstrate leadership, whether you have the nominal title or not. Actually, high-performing teams and organizations have leaders throughout the team. You don't have to have the job title. You don't have to identify with the job title of leadership in order to be a leader or a leader in the team or a leader in the context. And then beyond that as well, when it comes to your style of leadership, often we identify with, a particular style, right? Like for me, servant leadership was always something that I aspired towards. Felt like that's an appropriate model. It feeds into my desire to coach and to provide, the right environment for performance to show itself, to happen. But is that the right call everywhere and always? My identity in leadership needs to, in order to be effective in all of the demands of me as a leader, needs to be able to adjust according to the situation, according to the individuals involved, according to whether my experience or skill set is the right fit for driving towards the best outcome. And holding all of those things true as things to explore, also recognizing that I have an ego in there, and I have an attachment towards what is meaningful in leadership, and that needs to be sort of questioned at moments too, to ask yourself, are you yourself leading from an ego-driven perspective because you have associated these ideas around identity into that situation, or are you able to step back and enable the situation in the most effective way, and question your identity in that situation, or be aware of and attuned to what the best identity is to identify with in order to have the impact that you want to have.
There's so much in there that really resonates for me, and with lots of coaching conversations that I've had with leaders over the years. You've almost encapsulated 25 years of coaching in a kind of a 2-minute explanation, which you've done really well. I want to let me just make that real for people in a couple of contexts that I think listeners would be able to relate to. The first is, and you mentioned teams a couple of times. It's a really good forum, I think, where you see leadership or not played out really well. We do a lot of team coaching. And very often we will ask the leader how they're likely to turn up in that setting and what role they want to play. And it's really, really fascinating to hear how different leaders will say they're going to show up. And then, by the way, how they actually show up. So, many will say, oh no, I just want to see myself as part of the team. We've got 2 days together. I just want to be part of the team and whatever. And I think that's interesting. I think that giving up that status and power too early or too completely actually is not very helpful for the team sometimes. And then very often when you get them into the room, and working together for a couple of days, they just can't help themselves but stamping that identity and authority onto the space. And it's not always the right move, So I think there's that from the leader's perspective, but there's also, very often with very senior teams, those people are leaders in their own right. They lead a function, or they lead a whole part of a director or something. They come to a senior team meeting, but because their boss is in the room, they become very subservient and don't lead and only follow. And yet they might be the best placed person to lead in a certain context. And I think little examples like that really capture what you've explained for people, which is in different contexts, you may have a nominal role that looks like one thing or the other, but that doesn't mean actually how you behave needs to play out in that way, because that may not be best. You may not be best serving the situation, the context, and the impacts that need to be made. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense. I'm curious, in the team's example that you described, when the nominal leader sort of elects to step in, even if that's not what they've identified as being the role that they want to play, you said that's not always the right call. What's the impacts when that's not the right call? Like what's the cost, let's say, of stepping in when it's not the right thing to do?
Yeah, great question. So let's just I hope I made myself clear, but I'm just going to reiterate. Sometimes it is absolutely the right thing for that leader to do. Something's kicked off, or somebody needs some information or a view, and we want to make a decision. We've had lots of discussion about it. It's absolutely the right thing for the leader to lead in that context. So I'm not saying it's never right, but the challenge, I think, is when you've got these always on leaders who almost can't switch it off. And they feel that they've got to turn up. They've got to be the brightest person in the room. They've got to be the person with the most informed view on everything, or always give a view on something. It's okay. No, just stop. Because the impacts, as you've asked me to question, I think are many, but I think they include reinforcing the role of the other people in the room, which is you're a follower, reinforcing the fact that actually your view doesn't hold as much weight or as much value as mine as the leader. So I think that's not a great thing. There's very little development opportunity for individuals to take more of a central role or a decisive role in those contexts. And for the leader themselves, I think they also don't get to hear what the possibilities are and the potential is in their group. And I don't just mean potentially new ideas. I mean, is it that, this person over here actually is a bit quieter and I don't really know them very well, and I've stamped on their opportunity to step into the light. And so I just don't know the team as well because I'm overbearing in my embracing of my own leadership in a context where I don't need to be. So there are probably many more, but there's a kind of 3 or 4 that I've seen.
Yeah, but those are really very real, tangible impacts, right? And actually, what we're saying here is that there's a real art form towards managing self in those moments, especially if we're driven by an identity of what it means to lead. Whereas actually in this situation, sometimes our leadership, the impact, our intention and the impact that we have are very misaligned. There's a gap.
Yeah.
So we're stepping in to lead because we think it's the right thing to do, or sometimes, just by default, because that's what we're used to. We're familiarized with like quick, sharp decision making or contribution. Whereas actually there's a cost to that, as you've just outlined there, Glenn. And so it's really incumbent on leaders, on teams, to be able to manage those moments, to manage self in those moments, to inquire, to do self-inquiry. I think this is a really important, level of awareness to ask yourself whether your contribution at that moment is the right time and right moment to contribute, or is that going to actually discourage others to, likewise contribute.
I'm going to do something really unfair now, which is I'm going to ask you to do a bit of self-reflecting on your self-declared servant leadership style, and it's a very loaded question, so forgive me. Adopting that style, how does that impact your stepping in and stepping out of leadership? And I appreciate that this is a coaching type question played out in front of a massive audience without your permission, but you can but in the context of just you and I have a conversation, how do you see that playing out, both in terms of the stepping in part of leadership, but maybe the, again, leading question, but is there a danger of stepping out of leadership too often?
Yes, absolutely. So something to be really honest and transparent about: the servant leadership style is very much an aspirational style. It's not always the default style, right? I am very much decisive in my thinking, and I like weighing up decisions and just coming to a fairly sharp conclusion around what I think is the best way forward. And in so doing, stepping in too quickly. So in a group setting like the team setting that you described, I absolutely can fall foul of doing that, even if the desire is to be more of a servant leader in that context. But where the servant leadership shows itself more is more in a one-to-one setting, more in a developmental setting. So I think, and if any of my former reports are listening to this, they'll probably be smiling to themselves as I talk through this, is actually I think at times I can over-index on stepping out, on trying to create space for reflection, development, and different ways forward, when actually they just want an answer around what I think they should do in that situation. And so the spirit of the approach there is to create space for development to happen. But I think the nuisance that causes is pace, right? And again, whereas people might be sort of shorter on time, and actually this isn't. So they don't want a teachable moment in this situation. It's just like, what do you think is the best way forward? Let's go ahead and do that. So that I think from my own experience, I overweigh too much on stepping out in that situation with good intent, but don't always judge that one correctly, because again, my default style is far more in that situation is far more around, coaching rather than being directive.
Yeah, interesting.
So that's probably a frustration that I cause on that side. Whereas in a team setting, it might be the converse is true, right? The situation that you just described, actually stepping in to suggest the way forward before all of the voices have been appropriately heard and countenanced and weighed up. So I think it affects the art form of judging it correctly. I think is nigh on impossible to be getting it correct every time, and actually the greater purpose of getting it correct might still jar for other parties or whatever. There's always sort of pros and cons. But I think that's the sort of net effect, I would say, of being misaligned, of not quite judging it correctly every time.
So I've got a similar example when I've asked all of the people that are involved in the Exigence sort of wider ecosystem, to give me feedback on my own leadership, and actually, whilst lots of it thankfully was quite positive, as somebody that does work in the leadership space, that was quite reassuring. But the one thing that was resoundingly clear was actually need to step into leadership more, and because people want to be led. And I think this is one of the paradoxes of leadership, that whilst at sometimes you definitely need to be in that leadership mode, at others you need to be in the followership sort of mindset and be willing to follow. I think the danger is that you can, I'm going to use your phrase, you can over-index on the stepping out to give people space and be sensitive to them and aware of them and empathetic to them. But it misses the point that actually very often people want to be led, not just need to be led. And sometimes those of us with a slightly more democratic, I guess, sort of approach to things can overdo it on that side too. It's not the same, but I wonder if you hear this a lot in your coaching. I've certainly heard it over the years, with people who say, "Oh, I'm not a leader," and and actually, I'm not sure I want to be a leader. I'm kind of a manager at best. And you sort of think, I'm not sure that denying that, even at back to our point, not a title-based leader, but are you willing to lead yourself? Can you notice when you're off track and call yourself to account, hold yourself to account differently? I think there's a mindset thing there for me, which sits way outside of any organizational structure and title you may be given.
I mean, for one thing that was coming up for me as you're describing that is whether you identify as being a leader or not. The mindset really is around what's the impact I want to have in this situation, and one sort of really simple triage, if you like, that I've kind of always applied in leadership or in those moments is, am I moving the business forward? Question, with my response, or am I moving this person forward with my response? And actually being led from those, led by those answering those questions. If yes, then this is an appropriate use of my time and an appropriate, contribution to make, whether I'm leading or following. And also, in order to judge those questions correctly, you've got to weigh up the pros and cons that we've just described, from like sort of stepping in or stepping out, too far. You've got to weigh all of that up in the moment as well, which is a lot to carry, but it ultimately is allows you to be a more effective contributor to the system. And I think whether you identify as being the leader or not, that I think that is, everybody should hold that as their standard for what they are trying to achieve within any given system.
Yeah, love that. I love that. And that requires some awareness, it requires high levels of awareness. And I think that requires high levels of awareness of yourself, but also the context that you are in, right? Because this whole idea of stepping in and stepping out is a very dynamic thing. It's not that you're stepping in a one context and you stay in. You might, if you and I were having a you were my leader and we were having a conversation at this point, I'd be expecting you to lead on some points and step back at others and allow me the space. And I don't just mean conversational space. I mean, power space or decision-making space and authority, actually, and it's you being willing as a leader to give that sort of flex on power, I guess, if we were going to use some language that you and I don't often use on this podcast, but I guess it is that to some extent.
Absolutely. And that's where I think the skill becomes powerful, right? Because when you can determine when to empower and when, if you do step in, you're disempowering others in a situation and judging that correctly, again, it comes back to like, am I having a net positive effect on the organization or the team or the individual that I'm working with? And assertion of the power that you might hold like legitimately as the as the leader in that situation can have a negative impact, right? You can remove some of the decision making power or delegating authority within those around you, and then wonder why people aren't stepping up. I often hear that in conversations with exec teams where the organization doesn't feel like it, people are stepping up to the challenge and they feel like overly constrained without looking at the question of self around, well, what are you doing that's discouraging people from stepping up? Where are you taking power away from a decision-making power from people in your team or authority or even ownership of their own development, just in the micro and sometimes macro decisions and behaviors that you exemplify or role model from really.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut across you. That's such an important point you've raised there, right? Which is, in order to give people the space to develop, as the leader, you may well have to do some fairly fundamental changing of what you think leadership's about. And I think by stepping out of leadership or stepping back from it a bit gives the space for people to step into, some of that. And when you were saying that, an image of, I will try and find a reference and put it in the show notes, but somebody talked about this idea of nature hates a vacuum. So if a leader steps, is too present and too overbearing and too much in that space, there's no space for anybody else to move into. Whereas if the leader steps away or steps out of that leadership space, it creates a bit of a vacuum that others will fill. And if you've got talent on I think there's a couple of things. Why would you do that? Well, if you've got talent on your team that you desperately want to keep, the best way to ensure they leave is to not give them the space to grow and to develop and to take some of that leadership responsibility for you. Frankly, what's in it for you as a leader is you can focus on the more of the strategic level work that you probably should be doing anyway. You may not like it as much as the technical bits of the job that you're staying in, but by doing that, you're operating at the right level probably for where you are in the organization and what the organization expects. So stepping away at times gives other people the chance to grow, but it also gives you a chance to refocus and reposition yourself into areas of the business that you probably should be doing anyway. I see that as two very clear benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. But also just the stepping out and creating a vacuum, I think there's a caveat around that whereby people still need sort of encouragement and guidance around where to step into, because if that's unclear, that can mean herding cats, right? Everybody kind of goes off in their own sort of slightly different direction, but whereas actually it's important, even if you are stepping back in order to enable more space for people to grow, that you've kind of got some parameters around where you want people to step forward to. So it's like a combined force to actually move the team or the organization or your objectives forward.
Yeah. 100%. And I think more than that even is that there is an cultural expectation in your team that people will be expected to lead now, or your context, whatever that is, that people, when you give them the space and you give them the direction and the support, that they are actually expected to step up themselves. So all of a sudden, it's not you just stepping away. It's also that there is an expectation, again, with that support, that people will step in and step up themselves. Because without it, I think the danger is, as you said, the vacuum might not get filled because people aren't sure whether they're allowed to or not, or expected to or not.
Yeah, precisely. So it feels like there's a real sort of tangible benefit towards that self-inquiry, being aware of when and how you want to lead, and what that means in terms of like stepping in and stepping out, but also the impact of stepping in at the wrong time or stepping out at the wrong time, and the benefit of judging that correctly. You get to solve for bigger and better problems within your own leadership and create the space for others to grow, but to grow in like a harmonized, in a clear direction, and ultimately contribute towards the net growth, new problems being able to be solved, which is again a superpower when all of the dynamics that we talked about being present in the pace of the world. You in leadership, you really want to be equipping your team to be able to solve new, and yourself to be able to solve new problems everywhere and always. Building the track before ahead of the train in true Wallis and Gromit style. That's the analogy that I have in my mind. So yeah,
I agree with that, and I think linking back to where we started in relation to the sort of leadership as the operating system of the organization, then you can see why this doesn't just impact the leaders who've got the formal titles. It's that it becomes the operating system of the whole organization, and people are given the opportunity to step in and lead when they're the best placed person to do that, or even frankly when they're not quite the best person yet, but it's a part of their development and expansion to give it a go. But the expectation is that we're all leaders, and we're trying to drive a quality of leadership up across the organization, because that is the currency with which we are sort of trying to develop the organization as a whole.
Well, brilliant idea to land on from this conversation.
Really enjoyed that. Really, and I think that's a good. Without some of this work early on, I don't think we, as we're intending to, can get a bit more granular in terms of some of the behaviors and approaches and mindsets for leaders to think about. Because if you can't lead theoretically, you actually have to get out there and try it. So I think what we're encouraging people to do is, irrespective of your position in the organization, look for opportunities and embrace them to lead, and then reflect on how it went. Cool. Really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for that. So I'll see you on the next one.
Likewise. Thanks, Glenn.